Hello students, welcome again. I would like to continue with the presentation of the grammar part unit 5 from North Star 5. I want you to please pay close attention to the image that is going to appear in these seconds. As you can see here, we have three people. They are commenting, they are transmitting information about the person that is leaving. Maybe they are gossiping around, that they are talking something that is not really necessary good information, but also it is used to comment about this poor person. Also, in this transmitting way, we call it direct and indirect speech. Especially indirect is what is happening right there in the picture. They're just transmitting. So I want you to please analyze the following questions that we have in the next diapositive. We have the questions, what did he say? What did she say? What did they say? So we try to use these questions in order to get whatever the other people have said. So we call this again indirect speech. See, we have the group of people asking these questions at the bottom part, and everything is related to this explanation of how the indirect speech works. Of course, it works with the direct speech. As we know, as a reminder, direct speech is the part in which we try to say or transfer the information as with the exact words of other people have said. But for the indirect speech, we have to do some modifications. So we have to read this carefully. So let's read with me. It says to add variety and interest when you tell story or repeat information, use a combination of direct and indirect speech. Direct speech is quotation of someone's exact words. That's what I have said, guys. We use the direct speech with quotations, and they are the exact words of the other person has said. Indirect speech reports or tells what someone said without using the person's exact words. When you use speech, try to vary the reporting verbs. Choose expressive verbs such as complain, mention, remark, answer, reply, predict, deny, explain, wonder, question, add, respond, comment, observe, and continue. So we have used a lot, guys, the most common verbs for the indirect speech forms, which are say or said, tell or told, ask and asked. So we use them a lot, but we have to take into account that we have this special group of verbs that I want you to use. Again, I can tell you that in here we're going to use the same structures as you have studied before, but they have different features. These are important features to be studied. Okay, we are going to read this faster, guys, but I promise you to give you an example for each. So I have much more examples in the next diapositives. So we have to take the advantage of the time by reading them. We have the statement, shift tense back, for example, from the past to past perfect. Make appropriate pronoun and adverb changes. What is this supposed to mean? When you are doing this back shift, you have to take into account that we have to change sometimes the pronouns. We have to change also the time, the adverbs that they use, but especially the combination of phrasal verbs. That's the most important. So let's continue in the same line. It says direct speech, and they have an example here. It says the sleep researcher commented enthusiastically, a daily power nap can enhance productivity. The indirect speech form is detailed like this. The researcher commented that a daily power nap could enhance productivity. As you have seen, guys, the verb that changes is the verb can. Instead, to make it into indirect speech form, they use could. So let's continue with the other line, please. We have questions. This part questions is the one that I want you to please pay a lot of attention, because we have to know how to make it in this special indirect speech form. So we have yes or no questions. Do not use say. Use if or whether. So we have to use if or whether for this type of questions. And then at the bottom part, we have the whose questions. And we have do not use say, use statement word order. As examples we have for the first one, it says the CEO asked the sleep researcher, will a daily power nap interfere with nighttime sleep? So that's the question. And the indirect speech form says, the CEO asked the sleep researcher if a daily power nap would interfere with nighttime sleep. So as you can see, guys, we are not using the yes or no questions. We use if. So we do not use any type of auxiliary verb in this opportunity for the question form. And the second example we have, the CEO asked the researcher when is the best time of day for power napping. In this case, napping is the time you sleep after a certain time of working environments. You take a rest, you take a break. But when is the question word that in here they are using in the direct speech form. For the indirect speech form, yes, we can use when as well, but this happens only with whose questions. The WH questions are the ones that we need to use the same structure basically. Okay, the changes that we have here also is instead of is we use was, but look at was is not in the same position as is. So we are using this verb almost like in the middle to present this indirect speech form. The other part is the commands. Use not plus infinitive with negative commands or other imperative verb forms. We have the commands. Commands are imperative sentences that they can be introduced when you use the indirect speech form, but it has a special way. So we have the sleep expert warned the employees to not drink coffee or alcohol at lunch. If we want to transfer this information, because since it was a command, it says do not drink coffee or alcohol at lunch. So if we transfer this into indirect speech form, we use the researcher warned the employees not to drink coffee or alcohol at lunch. As you can see, guys, right here, I'm going to point it, yes? Do not, they are using an auxiliary do, but in the time they use the indirect speech form, they use only not to. So they omit again the auxiliary verb usage. Okay, so continuing with this, we have the backshifting. We know this common form is when we talk about or we transmit the whatever a person has said. We use from the present, we use the past tense as I'm explaining here. We need to have accuracy when using indirect speech sentences. For direct speech sentences in present, we use the past tense. This is something really common to remind. So as an example, I have the direct speech sentence says the bistro 110 GM. GM is the general manager. You had to make good tips today. So you guys analyze this because we have a sentence said by the GM in the present tense. Now I have the indirect speech backshift. And we have the sentence made like this. The bistro 110 GM remarked that we had to make good tips today. I use remarked because this is a very expressive verb that we can use now in this type of sentences. As I said, not only we can use said, told, or asked, we can use different verbs. And this is the idea of today, that you guys can use different verbs. So the verb is marked in blue because you see what was the verb to include in the indirect speech form. Then the other part of the backshift we have, instead of you, we use we. And instead of have, we use the past tense of have, which is had. And I use, as I said, my special verb for this type of examples from the present to the past. In the second example I have, to backshift direct speech sentence to indirect forms in the past. In this case, we use the past perfect. If the person has said something directly in the past tense, I need to use for the indirect speech sentence, I have to use the past perfect tense. you know this structure, but it is so good to remind these guys again. So I have the following example. We have Carlos. He literally said, I went to the bank to open a new account. You can see, guys, the verb is in past. I'm using this simple example so you can have an idea clearly. If we use the indirect speech sentence, I transfer it like this. Carlos mentioned that he had gone to the bank to open a new bank account. And here are the changes. Instead of I, we use he because we are transmitting to someone else. The other part of the change is the verb. And we have the combination of the verb in the past perfect, which is had gone instead of went. And the special verb that I used was mentioned. Now we have the other part of the backshifting, which is the third example. We have to backshift direct speech sentence to indirect speech. In the questions, we use if or whether. So in these cases, as I say at the beginning, we don't have to use for the yes or no questions in the indirect forms. We do not use any auxiliaries. We have to introduce if or whether. So pay attention to this following example, please. DS tells the direct speech form, and that's what we have, Peter. The question is, did they come often to this restaurant? So you notice that the sentence is in present, so we have to use the structure that I was mentioning like this. The backshift is, and this one represents the indirect speech form. So we say, Peter asked if they came often to this restaurant. So if is the word that we are going to use instead of the yes or no question auxiliary verb. We use ask. That's the one that I use because, of course, Peter is asking a question. So that's why I chose this verb in order to make me understand and make the others understand what the other person has said in the past. Then the other change is come. I use came because it's the verb in past tense, the one that we use. And that's part of the backshift for the question form. Now we have the other backshifting part, and it is about the commands. So let's read, please. To backshift negative commands from direct speech to indirect speech, we never use auxiliary verbs as we did in the question forms. Instead, we use this structure, not to. Maybe you are like very familiar with this type of usage of words in English, but it's really necessary to be understood because it's not only in some other cases, but we use this in indirect speech forms too. So the example of this backshift is, as I said before, DS is the direct speech form with quotation marks, exactly what the person has said, and it says using an affirmative command. Well, I say affirmative because he wants this not to happen, yes? But of course, the auxiliary verb is in negative form. So we say, don't take that way because there is a lot of traffic. In this case, he is like type of recommending, but at the same time, he is like trying to give this command to let people know that it is so wrong to take a way in which they are going to find a lot of traffic. So in the time we want to transfer this to a third person, we use the following, please. And this is the indirect speech form. We have here, George explained not to take that way because there was a lot of traffic. You see here, guys, instead of don't, I use not to. This is the way that we use for these imperative sentences. Also, another change, you have to pay close attention because I introduce in the first example, in the direct speech form, a second sentence with because. This one contains is. That one has to be modified as well. And we use was. Yes? We use was. Then I use the verb explain. I chose this verb because that's the one that makes much more sense to my sentence. We continue in the next video.